Okay, let's get started by talking about the Manpower plan. First of all, let's talk about the downsides of having no Manpower plan. You can find yourself understaffed, and obviously if you don't have enough people to service the market, you're going to lose potential revenue, you're going to lose potential profit. That's pretty clear. The other side of that is you can be overstaffed in a couple of ways. You might have just too many people around, or you may have the right number of people around, but you're paying for highly skilled people who are doing lower skilled work, which kind of leads into the next item, which is having the wrong skill sets, which is going to lead to low productivity. The wrong experience levels, also creating low productivity. It leads to confusion and disorganization, and we can lump the next one together, chaos. Who does what? Who reports to who? Whose responsibility is which? All those kinds of things. And those also lead into the unnecessary conflicts. Hey, I'm supposed to do it. I report to so-and-so, so on and so on. The bottom line to all of this, well, the next to bottom line to all of this, is that it creates a lot of stress on the owner. You're having to manage all of these things, and the business just is harder to run. So it promotes a general lack of efficiency and a general lack of profitability. A couple of ways we can do manpower planning. One is we can do it short term. We've done the time studies in the time management module. We identified a few things that we could get off our plate in a pretty short amount of time. We spec the job requirements, and then we can go out and either hire on a job-by-job basis or fill the positions by shuffling people around or reassigning them tasks. The good news is that that doesn't require an awful lot of thought, and it gets a fairly quick result. The bad side of it is that it's haphazard. It doesn't really coordinate with other hiring needs, and it may not tie to the upcoming revenue or the ability to pay. The long-term manpower plan, the upside to that is that it's an integrated approach, meaning that it's integrated in a couple of ways. First of all, it's integrated with regard to all the hiring, how each hire fits in with all the others over time, and it matches those things up with the revenue that's going to be required to fund those hires. Long-term manpower planning eliminates hiring reactively and on the fly, the phenomenon of whatever warm body happens to walk in the door just to fill a position. Ties the hiring revenue, or it ties hiring to the revenue plan, and even more importantly, it ties it to your long-term goals. We established these goals back in the Setting a Star to Steer By module, where you created a long-term goal for your business and yourself. The business has to get there. You created the long-term revenue plans. Well, to create the revenue, you're going to have to do a staffing plan that supports it. So it means that hiring is in fact supporting progress towards those long-term goals. Whereas short-term hiring, certainly it may do it, but it's not going to be linked, and you just kind of have to hope in that case. And long-term manpower planning maximizes productivity and profitability because it makes sure the right people are in the right place. You've got them timed properly. You don't have them before you need them or too late. And by matching their skills and their experience to the job that you want them to do, they're going to be the most productive and the most profitable for you. The downside to long-term manpower planning, it requires more effort up front than just throwing an ad in the paper and seeing what shows up. So which way is better? Big surprise. The long-term plan. How do you create it? Well, we start with the long-range view and the vision for your business. This is what we talked about, the vision that came out of the Setting the Star to Steer By. We create a list of functions to support the business along the way. We translate those functions into positions. We'll do all this I'll have some slides coming up that are going to make these a lot clearer. We track back to the current reality. Essentially what that's saying is, where do you want to be? Where are you now? That's the current reality. And then we bridge the gap. What positions have to be filled in between today and where you want to be to make these things happen? Back to your vision, where do you want to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? What revenue will be needed when to make that happen? Being proactive, what jobs will have to be filled to create the revenue, and when should the jobs be filled? The focus here is on functions, not people, meaning what jobs need to be done. It doesn't matter who the person is who may be in the job now, not yet. It doesn't matter where you might intend to promote somebody who's already in the organization. It doesn't matter yet. Right now, we're simply going to talk about the functions that have to be performed to make your business operate. This is, of course, the simplest structure you can come up with, and it's the same that for pretty much every business. At the top of the organization is the management, and then we have 3 functions underneath it. Somebody's got to get the customers, somebody's got to serve the customers, and somebody's got to kind of keep an eye on how the paperwork flows and manage the money and things like that. Pretty much every business has to have those four components, those 4 functions. Then, depending on what your business type is, the industry, the geography you're in, the size of the business, what activities are going to have to occur within each of those general functions. Obviously, if you're a sandwich shop like we saw in the customer journey, the functions that occur within a sandwich shop that are going to be different than the functions that have to be done for a plumbing contractor. So we go through the customer journey and the systems listings that we did for the critical and key processes. And when I say that some activities may or may not be applicable to every business, for example, you're probably not going to need an investor relations department. It's not a critical function for $1 million business. Those are the activities that need to be performed. Now we're going to talk about the jobs that are needed in each area to make those activities happen, and we're going to set up the reporting relationships. Okay, we're going to use the plumbing business. Here's an example of what a plumbing business might look like. We have the owner or general manager. Then here are the 3 functions that we talked about before. We have sales, we have operations, and we have administration. Now we start to get down into more functions. What are the positions that have to happen to make the functions above them happen? Well, for sales, we're going to need to have an estimator. The plumbing function is going to have a dispatcher, and then the dispatcher will need to have a group of installers, the people who actually generate revenue for the business. The administrative function, or the office manager, needs the positions below the bookkeeper, the receptionist, to make those functions operate. Next thing we'll do is we'll add names in all the boxes. What we did before was simply put in the positions and the functions. Who was in those positions at this point didn't make any difference, but now we'll fill them in. Right now, Joe is sitting in the top box as the owner and general manager. Well, that makes perfect sense. But he's also in a few other boxes. He's performing the role of sales, and he's the estimator. So Joe's pretty much the sales guy. And there's also an open position over here in the sales department that's the marketing assistant. In the operations universe, Joe has Bob running that show. Bob also works as a dispatcher. And then we have 5 installers, all of whom work under Bob the dispatcher. The office manager is Susie. She also does the bookkeeping job. And there's Paula the receptionist. So where are the candidates for planned hires? This is a plan that's going to get us to a little short-term goal. This isn't a long-term goal. We're going to get there in a minute. But for right now, let's just look at where Joe wants to be, say, in a couple of years. In red, here are the positions that Joe really wants to take care of. He wants to get rid of these 3. He wants to get rid of 2 of these jobs, the sales manager position and the estimator. And he also wants to hire the marketing assistant. When he does that, his name will only be in the top box, and he will have filled the gap between where he wants to be and where he is today. At least in the short term, he will have filled that gap. once he's decided that these are the 3 positions that he wants to hire, kind of got to figure, okay, you know the positions you want to hire, so when are you going to hire them and how are you going to afford them? You create your manpower plan based on things like the business growth, what people can replace other people, and whatever your delegation plan was coming out of the delegation module and out of the time management module. In our example, we're going to say that Joe wants to offload these 3 positions in this order. In 6 months, he'd like to hire the sales manager. In 12 months, he'd like to hire the marketing assistant. And next year, it's going to end up being 18 months, we're going to hire the estimator. So he'd like to do those things in that order over that period of time. Okay, that's what he wants to do. How is he going to know if and when he can afford them? So meaning what revenue is he going to need? Okay, now we're going to do a few numbers, not too many, but a few. To figure out when he's going to be able to afford these people, he's going to need a couple of things. He needs to know his gross profit as a percent of sales. It's also known as your gross margin. It's revenue minus direct cost. Direct cost being any cost, materials and labor, or anything else that is directly used in the generation of revenue. Okay, so we need the gross profit as a percent of revenue, or the gross margin, and then we need the burden cost of the salaries that you want to hire. Okay, the trick here is that, or a place where people kind of fall into a trap sometimes, is they'll say, gosh, I want to hire the $50,000 guy. He's going to cost me $50,000. When am I going to get $50,000 more revenue? Well, that's going to kind of bite you because, first of all, you've got to pay him out of profit, not out of revenue. And that's why we did the first part of this. We're going to have to pay him out of the gross margin. Then we're going to have to look at all the costs that are associated with this employee. And those costs are way more, usually, than just whatever the salary is. There's usually some kind of insurance. There's usually some vacation. There's some kind of sick leave. There can be any number of things, and every one of them are part of the cost of the employee. A lot of times they're hidden down in administrative costs, kind of spread into various categories, so it's hard to see what a particular employee costs. But if we forget that amount of money, it's going to skew the amount of money that is needed from a revenue standpoint to fund this hire, and you're going to be upside down. And this cost, if we ignore it, it can run up to 30% of the base salary. So let's use this example. We're going to hire our new salesperson, and we're going to say that that salesperson's salary is $50,000. We're going to make him a non-commissioned salesperson, just to make this example a little easier. So $50,000 is his salary. I talked about the burden being 30%. We'll just use that as a rule, as a example here. So 30% of $50,000 is $15,000. Add the two, and we get a total cost of that employee of $65,000. We'll assume here that our gross profit, or our gross margin percentage, is 45%. So, pretty simple calculation. We divide 65,000 by 45%, and we get a break-even revenue for that position of $144,444. That's how we do it for one person. That's the salesperson. Next thing, we'll take a look at all 3 of these hires together. Okay, this is exactly what we just looked at, only it adds the other 2 people that we've been discussing. Here's the salesperson that we talked about. Here's the $144,000 that we talked about. That's in 6 months. Then in 12 months, Joe wants to hire the marketing assistant. In 18 months, he wants to hire the estimator. All of these calculations are exactly the same as what we did for the salesperson. The only thing that I've added here, and it's more of a look out for kind of thing, $144,000 is what we'll need for the salesperson. And we'll need that on an annual basis. It's an ongoing increase in revenue of $144,000 to justify or break even on the cost of that salesperson. If we add the marketing assistant, that's going to be another $101,000. So by the time the marketing assistant is hired 12 months down the road, if Joe wants to break even, he's going to have to be increasing his revenue to the point of $245,000. Same thing when we go over to the estimator. That's Joe's third hire. We drop down here. The estimator would require $115,000. Well, we add that to the prior cumulative number, and now it means that Joe's going to have to get to $361,000 to justify, again, or break even. We'll talk about break even in a second. The cost of these three people. Something to be clear on here is that this is a break-even analysis. It just means that you're going to generate, or Joe's going to generate, just enough money to pay for these people and break even on them. The thing about employees are you expect to make money on them. If you don't make money off the investment in those people, you might as well not hire them. So this is simply break even. If you don't get a good deal more than $144,000 in incremental revenue from your salesperson, there's no reason to hire them. Okay, that was a relatively short-range plan. We only went out 18 months. A long-range manpower plan is it's the same thing, only it's just bigger and longer. It's got a longer time frame, and it's got more people. So let's say that Joe wants to go from $2 million to $3 million over some period longer than 18 months. Before we go any further, let me just say here, bigger isn't necessarily better. It's perfectly okay to be somewhere in terms of revenue, or to say, I want to get to a point and just flatten and be right there for the rest of my business life. Those things are perfectly okay. Many of our clients are really interested in growth, but you don't have to be. It's completely up to you. But if you do decide you want a bigger company, the only way to really get there is to leverage your skills by adding more people. So this is, again, it gets a little scary looking, but it's really not. This is the chart that Joe has put together for what his business will look like when he gets to the $3 million target revenue level. Remember, we started off a while ago with the same kind of chart, only all we had at that time was Joe, and we had Joe sitting over here in sales, and we wanted to replace Joe in estimating, and he was actually performing the sales rep job. So we wanted to replace Joe in two places, and we wanted to hire the marketing administrator sometime in the next 18 months. That's what we just did. Well, now looking out to a bigger revenue number further down the road, there's going to have to be more people. There's Bob. We saw him before as the ops manager. Well, Bob was doing the dispatching as well, but we're going to have to find somebody to replace Bob because he's going to get busy up there as the ops manager. We're going to have a crew supervisor for the existing guys. And then if we're going to get to 50% more revenue, we're probably going to have to hire some new people. So that means a second crew supervisor and a series of new installers down here. Once again, everybody in red is somebody that we're going to hire new. In the administrative side, Susie was down here as a bookkeeper. We're going to promote her. That's our plan over the next however long it's going to be. We're going to promote her up to the head of finance and administration. But we're going to have to replace her as the bookkeeper. And we're also planning on adding an accounts payable clerk and an accounts receivable clerk. Paula was our receptionist before, and she's going to continue to be there. And up here, Joe is deciding that it's about time for him to have an administrative assistant. Now, again, this looks scarier than it really is. Because all this is the same spreadsheet that we looked at with the 3 hires. Only now we have a different horizon, a different time horizon, going all the way out to the second half, or actually the end of 2015. And we've got a bunch, all those new hires that we talked about are over here. The ones that were on the previous slide, all in red. So Joe's going to hire a couple of the new installers here. He's going to hire a couple more in the second quarter of 2013. He's going to hire the crew leader in the third quarter. He's going to hire that bookkeeper to replace Susie over here in the fourth quarter. And then sometime in the first half, he doesn't know exactly when, because you get a long way out there. It's hard to be very precise about what's going to happen, but you want to slot it in somewhere. So he's going to hire that, the bookkeeper. He's going to hire an AP clerk out there in the first half of 2014. He's going to hire the AR clerk in the second half of 14. Going to hire the ops manager, or make the replacement, in the first half of 15, and he's going to do the finance administration manager. Actually, what it's going to do, it's going to be a promotion of Susie. We're going to move her up. So it looks like a great deal, but it's really all the same spreadsheet, just kind of blown up into a longer time horizon and more people. The thing about adding people is that you can't grow without them. But we all feel kind of uncomfortable hiring before the revenue actually shows up. The other side to it, though, is that you can't sell any added business unless you have the capacity to sell it, right? You can't go out and sell 50% more of whatever it is you do unless you've got the capacity to produce 50% more. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. It's important to really understand where that capacity funding is going to come from and when. And when I say capacity funding, it's a fancy way to just say, where are you going to get the profit, and where are you going to be able to justify these hires? How are you going to line them up with when the expense of the hires is going to hit? What it means is that a marketing plan and process that's going to create the new revenue has to be there to justify the new hires. Just because you've figured out what that revenue, that break-even revenue is going to be, or the break-even revenue and more to create a profit on those new hires, it doesn't mean it's going to happen just because you know what the number is. Some kind of coordinated marketing action is going to be needed to make that incremental revenue occur. And marketing actions, first of all, they're a plan. They're not something that happens next Tuesday or haphazardly. A marketing action is a long-term plan. And it has to be included in the financial plans. The whole thing has to be tied together. Marketing is something that's outside the scope of this program because it's a subject unto itself. But we do have a complete killer marketing system in the works, and keep an eye out for that. So how do you use the Manpower plan once you've got the thing put together? Well, it drives the hiring process. Instead of reacting to who it is you need and who quits and oh my gosh, what am I going to do? You're taking back control of the hiring. You know when you're going to hire, you know who you're going to hire, and you know how you're going to create the money to pay for them. It coordinates the hiring across the business so that you're not doing something in one place and going, oh geez, I really wish I'd thought about that because we really needed somebody over on the other side of the house as well. I wish I'd thought about it. I could have hired somebody who could fill both sets of shoes, maybe. Doing a Manpower plan forces an owner to really have a clear understanding of the organization. Unless this stuff gets written down, unless there's a chart that's actually written and the boxes are laid out and the lines are drawn, it's never quite clear, except perhaps in someone's mind there's an idea of how all this goes together and how the functions are supposed to work. Fourth on this list, it helps employees see how they fit in. When an owner doesn't have a completely clear picture of how the organization is set up, the employees sure don't either. They may think they do, but that assumption is probably not going to be quite the same as what you as an owner have. And it would really be helpful if you were all on the same page on this. The Manpower plan also, it creates paths for employee development. Once you've got this thing in a place where you can actually see it, you can look at the people in each of the boxes and say, you know, Susie can work herself upward into that finance and administration director's position, or Bob can work up to the ops manager's job, or Mike the installer is pretty much qualified in a year or so to move up to dispatcher. But having the pictures in place so that you can see who can move from point A to point B and even to point C and D, really a lot more helpful than trying to keep all those things in your head. We're going to talk about career development in a little bit, but having the pieces together in a way that you can see them is a lot more helpful than trying to do it in your head. Finally, a good manpower plan is also a basis for the delegation plan. In the very beginning, we saw Joe sitting in a couple of boxes where he didn't want to be. Those things became candidates for delegation. He wants to hire somebody, and then he wants to delegate the jobs into those positions. So the manpower plan. What I say here is that although Band-Aid hiring, and what I mean here is the short-term hiring, it's inevitable. Once in a while somebody quits, something happens, you just have to fill a position. You can't get around it. But long-term planning for manpower gets way better results in the long run. The plans need to be tied, the manpower plans need to be tied to the long-range goals so that who you hire is in fact moving it toward where you want to be. It's absolutely crucial to know the numbers. If you're not clear on what employees are going to cost you in terms of that burden as well as the salary, and getting down in there in the expenses and the overhead, this is, you know, no way around it. A lot of those expenses are in fact employee expenses that tend to hide. So knowing what those numbers are is crucial. Understanding your gross margin is crucial, because that's the number that's actually going to pay people, and that's the one that you're going to use to derive that break-even income. So that's a critical number to know. The last thing to say here is that no matter how much upfront thinking you do, how much analysis you do, how much planning you do, it's going to help you reduce the risk of hiring at the wrong time and hiring the wrong person. But it's never going to take away 100% of the uncertainty, and that's okay. This is the kind of thing that falls on the owner's shoulders. You're never going to have 100% risk-free action that you take. And it's not your job to create risk-free actions. Your job is to simply do the homework and make sure that the risk is minimized. That's manpower planning. The next thing we'll do is move on to defining roles and responsibilities.